Hi, I'm Rachel, and I'm here to do my favorite reads of 2019 slash anticipated reads of 2020 video. Yay! I'm actually filming this first part, the favorite reads of 2019, a little bit early because I happen to have physical copies of all of the books, but not for too long because I have to wrap one of them. So I have three books to share with you in this video. It took me a while to figure out, especially the third, but I'm pretty happy with it and overall with the diversity in my choices. My third place winner kind of feels the most personal to me. It is Anti-Semitism Here and Now by Deborah E. Lipstadt. She's a historian most well known for being sued by David Irving when she called him a Holocaust denier, and then she won against him in court. Here she comes more to the modern day and analyzes how anti-Semitism has manifested on different political spectrums. I just found it largely cathartic because, you know, in today's day and age, there's just so much toxicity everywhere. And I come across anti-Semitism and anti-Semitism apologetics everywhere. And yes, I come across some of the cry wolf about anti-Semitism when it's really more legitimate criticism of Israel. It's, you know, apparently a hard line to walk, but Lipstadt really just lays it down for us and takes away all of, you know, all of this crazy, toxic culture, you know, all of this bias that exists in the world today about who gets to be oppressed and who doesn't, and also all of the anti-Semitic stereotypes that have been with us for centuries that keep on manifesting in different ways. And it just was really cathartic for me to step away from all of the anxiety of this toxic culture I've been talking about and just think about it in plain, simple terms. And I think it's been helping me to stay away a little bit from all of that craziness out there in the real world and to stick with the fact that there is truth out there that can be rationally looked at. And also at the end going into the beauty of the culture and religion of Judaism, that there is more to us than all of this hatred that is lobbed at us, so it has a somewhat hopeful end as well. So I, again, found it very cathartic. My second place book is the big chunkster on the list. This is Priory Over the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This is an adult fantasy book, huge, something like 800-ish pages. This is a retelling, a gender-bent retelling of St. George and the Dragon. So there's a lot of familiar tropes in here, really, about medieval style kingdom, especially in the West, which is largely based off of Europe and Britain. And then we have an East that is largely based off of Japan. And we also have dragons in both scenarios. Actually, good dragons in the East that are based off of the Eastern perception of dragons on Earth, and then evil dragons in the West, which are based more off of Western mythology about dragons. But it's so much larger than that, given all of this. We're primarily following this character Ede, who is a magical woman from a magical society that goes to her neighboring country to protect the queen of that country, who is a descendant of the St. George character that have been ruling that land for a while. And they're both Western civilizations, but one of the strengths of this book is just going into, even within one culture, there's so many different interpretations of the past and of mythology slash, you know, religion, fairy tale, whatever. And there's a beauty in Ede and the Queen and how they start off at odds, and then despite their differences, they see the humanity in each other, and there's just a really touching love story that develops through here. Then in the East, we follow a dragon rider who, you know, ultimately integrates with the rest of the plot. I think that section was a little less developed, although not to the extent of like the East in George R.R. Martin's books, where, you know, there really are no Eastern characters to follow in the East. At least there's a couple of Eastern characters here to follow, and there's some build-up of the mythology and world building. I just wish there'd been a little more, although, you know, again, we're dealing with a lot here. There's another character who actually is a Western character who's in the East, and he's also very fascinating. I think he's Shannon's favorite character. He's a conflicted, flawed character. You know, those are the greatest kind, and they're all interacting with the major plot, which is about, you know, there's a doomsday thing that's on the horizon about the Western dragons being reawoken, and whether the West will get its act together and realize the Eastern dragons aren't evil so that, you know, they can help them defeat the Western dragons. But luckily, there's just so much, you know, culture and magic and world building and amazingness and characters that are worth following, especially a lot of wonderful female characters that you wouldn't see in your standard medieval-esque European fantasy of yesteryear anyway. So it just makes it all the more compelling and rich and so much more than just a quest story or what have you. It's a standalone. In a way, I wish that she had made it into like 2 or 3 novels, and then she would have been able to flesh out the East a little bit perhaps. I'd also be okay with more after this. I hear that maybe she'd write more from this series after this, although there's some groaning from sci-fi fantasy fans who are tired of series all the time. But, you know, when you find something you love, don't you want to read more of it? I know I do. And my favorite pick of 2019 is definitely a standalone, although it's also very rich in culture and history, but it does feel like definitely everything that's been put down is all that needs to be said. And anyway, I am talking about the very first book I read this year, so never really beat that one. It is The Weight of Ink by Rachel Kadish. This is historical fiction, although there's also a large present-day counterpart. The historical fiction takes place in 16th century England right after Jews are readmitted and allowed to live in the country again. And in that storyline, we are following a female scribe. She's scribing for a learned rabbi who's trying to bring religious practice to the assimilated Jews who had been largely in hiding in England. And we're following her story in large part, or we have the excuse to, because in the present day, you know, we're in an academic setting, and a historian, Helen Watt, has found these papers that were hidden in a nice house in Richmond, and she's able, with the help of a secondary character, to realize that they are from a previously unknown scribe of this era, and then they're able to deduce ultimately that it's a female scribe, which is hugely unusual, especially in Jewish circles. There weren't as many Jewish female writers even as there were Christian writers, and there weren't many of those either. And in large part, I think Kadish was trying to answer the question that Virginia Woolf set in A Room of One's Own, where she questioned what it would take for a woman in Shakespeare's time, well, technically this is slightly past Shakespeare's time, but what it would take for a woman to be able to write and survive. And so she crafts this story, and I gotta say that whether or not you believe it, Esther is such a compelling character. She is absolutely the best character in here, I think, although the rest of the characters are also richly drawn, and I loved drawing parallels between the characters in the present and the past, because they're all basically searching for meaning, and Kadish is empathetic to all of them in all of their iterations. They're all on different paths, especially, of course, Esther, who, as a learned woman, of course, is very different than most people around her. But it's also about relationships. It's about what it takes to be the person you feel meant to be. It's about communicating with Baruch Spinoza, because, you know, you can do that in a historical novel. It's lush with details, physical details. It's beautifully researched, I believe. Kadish talks about making sure that none of the vocabulary in the 16th century that she uses is, you know, anachronistic. I mean, some of the dialogue is anachronistic for the time, but none of the vocabulary is. It also shines a light on a part of Jewish history that perhaps is less well known, and really gets into the nitty-gritty. That's what I love about historical fiction, where, you can get into the heads of humans the way that you can't in nonfiction, because, that wouldn't be real. But just to see how they lived and the fears that they brought with them from the Inquisition, because a lot of the newcomers to Britain were from Amsterdam by way of Portugal and Spain. Like, that's where Esther was from, and the rabbi and so forth. It was a fascinating, beautiful read, and I'm looking forward to where this author goes next. Anyway, I will have links to my fuller Goodreads reviews for these 3 books down below. And now I'm off, but I'll be back in just a second of BookTube time to talk about my anticipated releases of 2020. Whoosh! And I'm back, just like magic. Closer to the new year as I'm filming this, and here to talk about the 9 titles I want to put on my anticipated releases list for 2020. That is a lot of titles, especially with a whole bunch of other reading projects I want to do next year. So maybe I'll take a leaf out of Kazan from Always Doings' channel to say maybe this is a pile of possibilities instead of definites, but I am pretty intrigued by all of them, and I tried to be diverse in terms of genre. I'll also have a lot of post-production to do this time with visual overlays, and I don't know too much about these books, so I figure I shouldn't ramble on, but I'll give my quick thoughts about why they caught my attention. First, on January 14th, we have Beyond the Shadowed Earth by Joanna Ruth Meyer. This is YA fantasy by an author who I've talked about a little bit here because we were in a NaNoWriMo Vidler group together several years ago, and I was intrigued by her career vantage, and since then, now she's had 2 books published, and Beyond the Shadowed Earth is the sequel of sorts to her first book, Beneath the Haunting Sea. I'm particularly intrigued by this one because I think it's about probing a character who was a bad guy in the first book. So that's somebody who generally has more complexity and flaws, and that always interests me. And plus, she made a deal with a god, which sounds pretty fantastical, and I like it. Then, coming out on February 4th, we have the Toni Morrison Book Club, which is written by a bunch of English professors about Toni Morrison's novels, or I believe that's where we're going, and that's what intrigued me about it. I think I first saw it on Russell at Ink and Paper Blogs' channel, well, first of all, I wanted a nonfiction pick. Always nice to have some literary criticism. And this year, one of my reading goals is to embark on reading all of Toni Morrison's novels. So I think it would be really exciting to end it with the chaser of reading whatever chapter or segment is about each book after I finish it, and to get some more perspective. I'm very excited. On March 24th, we have The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. This is her first publication since Station 11, which I, along with several other people, completely fell in love with. And ever since I've been trying to read comps, basically, about books that are compared to it. Usually I'm not too impressed. I also, this year, read Emily St. John Mandel's Backlist, and to be honest, I didn't fall for them like I fell for Station 11, although it was intriguing to see some themes pop up in Here and Again and everything. But, Station 11 really put her on the map, I believe, like nothing else from her backlist, so I do think that will influence, I hope, how she handles her next book. And I certainly don't want it to just be, a watered-down second attempt at Station 11. I'm excited to see where her imagination will take her next. Also on March 24th, we have The Poet King by Alana C. Meyer. This is the conclusion of an adult fantasy series. It's about an epic fantasy world, and instead of being all about sword and sorcery stuff, well, there is some sorcery, I guess, but it's much more about music and poetry. And to be honest, I don't really remember the first two books all that well, except for the beautiful language of them and how entranced I was when reading them. But I had it in my mind that I would reread the entire trilogy, so I'd start with the first two books before coming to The Poet King. Also, Meyer is an Orthodox Jew, and her main city of Tamberlin is based in part off of Jerusalem, although a lot of her inspiration for this series comes from medieval troubadours. Moving on to adult science fiction on April 14th, I'm going with The Last Emperox by John Scalzi, although it kind of feels like a cheat because I haven't read any of this trilogy. But it's been intriguing me ever since the first book, The Collapsing Empire, came out several years ago. I just had it in mind that I'd want to listen to it on audio, but it's only available through Audible. That being said, I just got an Amazon Prime account, in part to watch The Expanse, and I think I can get to Audible from there. I'm not sure if it's that easy. I'm hoping it is, but you know, Amazon, I guess, might want to take more of my money. Anyway, this is a space opera about an intergalactic empire and kind of magical-esque trade routes, I think, in peril, although I imagine there'll be some sort of technological explanation, although, you know, it'll be so far future that it'll basically be magic. I feel like I should challenge myself more with hard sci-fi, but I do love my space operas, and John Scalzi has been intriguing me for a while. He seems like a really cool guy, and so I wanted to give his fiction a chance. On April 21st, we have a debut novel, Passage West, by Rishi Reddy. This is a reason why I love Goodreads. I mean, I know most people on BookTube, even when they love Goodreads, they have critical things to say, but I love it. I'm just absolutely in love with this site and everything I can do on it. And one of the things I can do is I can check out upcoming releases by authors I've already read in the past. And so this novel came up in my feed because 10 years ago, I read Rishi Reddy's short story collection, and I remember liking it. I'll link my review down below. It's about Indian Americans, I believe. She is pulling out some big guns, I think, in terms of historical fiction with her debut novel. Maybe she's been really working on it for this past decade, but it takes place around World War I in California, and it's about Indian sharecroppers. So I'm very excited and very intrigued. Then on May 5th, we have The Book of V by Anna Solomon. She's another repeat author for me who turned up in my Goodreads feed. I read The Little Bride by her. In my memory, I feel kind of iffy about it, but apparently my review is a little more positive, so it must have had its charms. I'll link to it down below. I might have not given this one a go, but I was so intrigued by the premise, so I'll read a little bit of this one. Basically, it's one of those historical / literary fiction novels with several threads throughout history. One is of a Brooklyn mother in 2016, which, okay. The next one is a senator's wife in 1970s Washington, D.C., which, I'm in the D.C. area, so that's intriguing. But then, the third one is the Bible's Queen Esther. And I'm like, what? And suddenly we're in ancient Persia? I just couldn't pass this up, especially since Solomon is a Jewish writer. The Little Bride was about Jews in Midwest America, so Queen Esther is a major character in the holiday of Purim, kind of one of our only feminist figures of the Bible, so it would be really exciting to see what Solomon might do with her in contemporary fiction, and see how in the world she can relate to these two much later protagonists. But even if not, I'm just really curious to see what Solomon will do with ancient Persia. Also on May 5th, we have The Queen's Shadow by E.K. Johnston. This is a new Star Wars canon book put out by Disney, and I think it's kind of sort of a companion to Johnston's first book, Queen's Shadow, which I listened to on audio and I really enjoyed, so I'll link that review down below. These stories are about the character of Padme Amidala, who I think was unfairly maligned by some fans, and frankly by Revenge of the Sith at the end. And I'm even somebody who likes the prequels. And it's been kind of exciting in a way to see them get some new life breathed back into them with the new trilogy, I guess. Just some nice, fun, fluffy reading. Really fun to listen to on audio, really, with the music they can take from the movies. This one, I think, is a retelling of The Phantom Menace from Amidala's point of view, so I hope it's not too diminutive, but mostly I'm expecting it to be fun. And finally, on May 19th, this is the big one for me. This is Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins, the next Hunger Game novel. I know this might lose me my adult booktube card. I don't care. I've decided that Hunger Games might be the hill I want to die on in terms of singing its praises, propping it up as a worthy story that actually goes pretty deep into issues of propaganda, disenfranchisement, and warfare, including the fact that when you get down to it in Mockingjay, which I think made the original trilogy, nobody's the perfect good guy or bad guy. So yes, I am a little bit nervous to see Collins return to the series, because I know some authors can peck away at their stories when the story is all over. Luckily, this is a prequel. It's not Katniss's story. Katniss's story is over. I'm really hoping she'll go into this earlier Panem to probe deeper into issues of totalitarianism, propaganda, violence. She seems like a thoughtful writer, not somebody who's just out here to make a buck. I shouldn't go ramble on and on about this. In fact, I already have. Back in November, I wrote a whole blog post about this book and about my feelings on the Hunger Games, so I'll just leave that down below. But yeah, I can't imagine anything coming out this year or most any other year that I would zero in on more than Suzanne Collins writing anything, but especially a Hunger Games novel. Maybe if I get my own publishing deal, but that's a whole other ball of wax. So that about covers it for me now. I will leave reviews to all of the books I talked about with reviews down below, and also Goodreads links to all of the anticipated reads if you want to learn more about those books. You see, you gotta love Goodreads. They give you synopses, reviews, and a bit of a snapshot on what the reading public might think of these books. Not that Goodreads is everything, of course. I have really enjoyed watching everybody's favorite books of 2019 videos and their anticipated reads of 2020. It's been a very exciting time here on BookTube as we move into not only a new year, but also a new decade. And I hope that everything you hope for your reading next year pans out and exceeds your expectations. I'll be listening to all of your reviews and reactions as you come out with them. And I will, of course, be posting my own. So thanks so much for watching, everyone. Happy New Year, and I'll see you next time.